That's right. Apparently in the Welsh times, the kings were no different than they are now. They just caroused and had a good time, and they were supported by the people. They were not necessarily revered, because the story is going to show that he had to keep certain things. He had to keep certain things, and if he didn't, that people would urge him to live up to his responsibility. The kings were primarily important as chief warriors. And in those days, it was thought that if a man was a really good man, he was a great warrior. And your courage and your strength in warfare depended upon your morality. So that if you were a really good person, you'd win all of your battles. But at any rate, he's at his court and he wants to go hunting, and he wants to go hunting in a place called the Glen Cutch. And the word Glen is where our word Glen comes from. He wants to go hunting in a glen called Cutch. It takes him about a day to get there, and he stops in a little village before he gets there and stays over, and gets there the next morning to the glen, and he lets his dogs loose at dawn. He chases them out with a blast of the horn, and they get on a stag, and in following after his hounds, he gets separated from his companions. And a funny thing happens as he's chasing after his dogs, and his dogs are running ahead of him and away from him. He hears other dogs coming toward him from another direction. And finally he comes into this clearing, and in this clearing he sees his dogs running toward a stag, but another set of dogs is already bringing the stag down. But these hounds are different than his hounds. These hounds are pure white. And you can see the pink in their ears. They're something like our domesticated rabbits. Pwyll is sort of an arrogant person, and he does something dishonorable. And if you were part of the royal, or if you were part of the nobles, you lived by a code of honor. But he so much wanted the stag that he did something dishonorable. He chases off the other pack of dogs, and he baits his own dogs onto the stag as though his own dogs had brought it down. And he's just finished this in this man wearing a gray-brown, something like what Earl is wearing, or something like what Tim is wearing. And he's riding a gray dappled horse. That is a gray piebald horse. The piebald figure comes in again, and he rides up, and Pwyll greets him, and he tells Pwyll, I'm not going to respond to your greeting. And Pwyll is sort of a smarty pants, and he says, is that because of a difference of rank? And the other guy says to him, no, I have no shame in my rank. But because of your discourteousness, I can't greet you. And Pwyll is still trying to bluff yet, and he's still boisterous, and he says, what have I done wrong? And the other guy says to him, he won't seek vengeance, but he dishonors Pwyll to the value of 100 stags. And Pwyll doesn't know that how this man knew that he had done what he had done. And Pwyll is still quite forward, but he's been shocked by this statement, and he says, if I have done wrong, I will earn your friendship. And the other guy says to him, how can you do that? You don't even know who I am. And Pwyll says, well, I'm the king of David. And he asks the other guy, who are you? And the other guy says, I'm Aron, and I'm the king of Anvin. Now, this is something quite shocking, because Anvin is the Tartarus of the Celts. So what the man is saying is that he is the prince of the dead. He's the king of the dead, and here he's talking to Puel. And Puel is so set on what he's doing that he says, how can I earn your friendship? And Aaron tells him, bordering on my kingdom is another land, and the king of that land is called Havgin. And he's always waging war on me. He's just no end of a nuisance. And he says, rid me of him. And Puel says, gladly, how do I do it? And Aaron sets down conditions. He says, we'll make a bond of friendship, and I'll give you my appearance and take yours, and being in my position, you will sleep with the most beautiful woman you have ever seen every night. And nobody will know that you are not I. And all of this will transpire for a year and a day, and at the end of the year and the day, you must fight and dispose Havgin. And Puel says, that's fine, but how do I find him? Yeah, he's undaunted. He's completely confident. He says, how do I find him? And Aaron says, you'll meet him at the ford. And he tells Puel, he says, when you are in combat with him, you must strike one blow, and only one blow. Just enough to finish him off, and no matter how much he begs, you're not to strike him more than once. And Aaron says that he knows from his own experience that if you strike more than once, it'll only revive him and cause him to come back and be strong. Puel says, okay, but who's going to take care of my realm? And Aaron says, I will. So Aaron takes him into his realm, this is into the realm of Fairy, and takes him to a hill where he's in view of his castle, and they exchange shapes, and Aaron goes back. Puel gets to the court, and he's treated very, very courteously, as though he really were Aaron. And they have a feast at night, and his queen, or the queen of Aaron, is as beautiful as Aaron said she would be. And they converse tenderly at dinner, and they have music and bards and all of that. But when they go to bed, he turns his back on the queen. And for a whole year, this goes on. Every day he goes hunting or he goes carousing. He has a great time. And at night they have a feast and they have entertainment. But when they get to bed, he just turns his back and he goes to sleep. At the end of the year and a day, on the appointed night, he takes his nobles and the whole company of warriors, and he goes to the ford, and there Havgin is coming from the other direction with his nobles and his whole company of his whole armament, and they see each other and they rush at each other, and Puel delivers one stroke and it shatters the shield and it shatters the armor, and it's a mortal blow. Right away, first shot. Havgin starts begging for mercy, and he says, give me a coup de grace, dispose of me, take me out right away. And no matter how much he begs, no matter how much he pleads, Puel demurs, and he won't fight anymore, just delivers the one blow. Havgin then tells his men to carry him home. And Puel says, fellas, you've got to decide who you want to serve. And they take counsel, and everybody decides that they want to serve Puel. and they all surrender. And by the middle of the next day, they have all surrendered and pledged allegiance to Aran. And Puel sends them all home, and then he proceeds alone as quickly as he can to Glencutch. There he meets Aran, and they exchange their lives back to what they were. And Aran returns to his court and has his normal life there. And at the first night in bed, he caresses his wife and he starts pillow talk. And she says, "Why, this is really different from you. Well, how come you're so different tonight?" And she just clams up. And Aran presses her, and finally she asks why he's been so cold for a year. And she tells the whole business. And at this point, Aran realizes, wow, I've got a real friend here. He could have been with my wife, but he didn't. And so he realizes that he has the truest of all kinds of friends that he can. Meanwhile, Puel has returned to David, and he comes to his court, and while he's there, he asks the people around him if they're content, whether they feel his rulership for the last year has been good, and they all say it's never been better. There's never been better rulership. And so Puel and Aran become friends over the years, and they trade gifts back and forth, and both kingdoms prosper. After a while, Puel is a very adventurous kind of person, as we've seen, and he wants some adventure. And he's holding court at Arbeth, and they have this big feast. And after the first course, he said, let's go to Gorsedd Arbeth. And Gorsedd Arbeth is a tor. It's one of these hills reputed to be hollow that are made they're handmade. They're sort of pyramid-shaped, or they're shaped like a teepee or something like that. And he is told that whenever somebody of royal blood sits there at night, one of two things happen. Either he takes a beating or he sees a wonder. And Puel is confident that the former will happen to him and not the latter. And so they sit down, and while they're sitting, this beautiful horsewoman comes riding by. And Puel asks his whole company whether anybody knows her. And nobody knew her. And Puel says, well, somebody run and learn who she is. So somebody takes off and starts running after her. But no matter how fast they run, the faster they run, the further behind they are, even though she just seems to be quietly loping along. So he says, who's got a fast horse? And he gets somebody that claims to have the fastest horse. He says, go and find out who she is. Guy takes off with the horse and goes as fast as he can. And the faster he goes, the further he is behind. And that about ends it for that night. And Puel suspects that there is some kind of hidden meaning. He's very brave and he's very adventurous and courageous, but he maybe isn't the brightest light in the sky. So he says, we're going to go back tomorrow night. And they search around and they get the fastest horse that they can get out of the fields. And they go up there the next night, and sure enough, she comes along. She's moving very slowly. And as she's going slowly, the guy takes off with the horse to try to catch up with her. Fast horse, and as fast as it goes, he still can't catch up. So Puel, as most people who give directions do, feel that, well, these guys don't know how to take orders right. So he gets his own horse and his own spurs, and he says, tonight I'm going to do it. And so he gets up there, and sure enough, she appears again, and the horse is just sort of trotting along, and he takes off after her. And the more he spurs his horse, the more he falls behind. And finally he calls out and he says, "Lady, for the sake of the man you love the best, stop for me." And she says, "Gladly." And she said, "It would have been better for you if you had asked sooner. It would have been better for your horse anyway if you had asked sooner." And Quill welcomes her. And she comes up to talk with him, and she draws up part of her veil. And he sees in her, a beautiful line, he sees in her the beauty of every girl and woman he has ever seen. She's like the compound of every beauty he has ever seen. And Quill asks her who she is. And she says, "I am Rhiannon, daughter of Heavy-eyed the Old." And she says, "I'm being married against my wishes. I'm being married to another, but she will not marry that other because of her love for Quill." This is a pretty interesting first meeting. And she says, "Even now, I want your answer." And Quill says, he wouldn't marry any other in the world but her. This is pretty big because she's also out of the kingdom of fairy. So the world is pretty big as far as Quill is concerned. And she says, "Fine, name the date." And he says, "The sooner the better." And she says, "A year from tonight, show up at Heavyhead's castle, and a feast will be prepared for you, and it'll be our wedding feast." And he agrees to that. And Quill goes back to his men, and whenever they bring up the subject of what transpired in the conversation, he says nothing. He changes the subject. So a year later, Quill and 99 of his men go to the castle of Heavyhead. And it doesn't say how they get there. The thought is that they all go to the Gorsedd Arbeth, and they pass through the hollow hill into the land of Faerie and make their way there. They're greeted, and they're all seated for the feast, and Quill is put between Heavyhead and Rhiannon, and the feasting is going on. And what is common is that they have minstrels and bards and people like that come, and then they're to be given gifts. Also, there are suppliants that come to the feast. And while the feast is going on, this young man with auburn hair, something like Paul's, he's wearing silk, comes up, and Quill bids him to sit. He says, "I will not. I am a suppliant with an errand." And Quill says, "Go on. What is it?" And he says, "It is with you. I have a favor." And again, Quill is not so bright, and he's very, very confident. And he says, "Whatever is in my power, you shall have it." At this point, Rhiannon must have elbowed him really hard, and she rebukes him for his carelessness. And the young lad says, "The woman I love best you are to sleep with tonight. It is to ask for her that I have come." Quill becomes completely silent and probably blanches white. And Rhiannon gives him an earful about his feeble-mindedness and tells him, "Don't say anything more." And she says, "This is Gwawil. He is the son of Clud or Cloth, a powerful man with many followers, and this is the guy my father wanted me to marry in the first place." Then she says to him, "Give me to him. You've given your word before you dishonor yourself." And Quill says, "I can't do that. I could never do that." And she says, "Give me to him. I'll fix it. He'll never have me." And she gives him a little bag all folded up. And she says, "Keep this. Don't show it to anybody." and tell Gwawil that this feast can't be his wedding feast because it was already promised to Pwyll. We'll just keep it as a feast, and that there will be another feast a year from now. Rhiannon lays down the plan. She says, all right, a year from now there will be another feast, and you bring your 99 guys and you keep them in the orchard away from the castle, and then you come disguised as a beggar and bring the little bag and ask for nothing more than the bag full of food. And she says, this bag is fixed so that no matter what you put in it, it'll never be full. It's bottomless. And after a good deal of the feast has been put in, Gwawil will start asking you, is this bag ever going to be full? And you tell him, it'll only be full when a powerful noble comes and takes his feet and packs everything into it. And she says, at that point, I'll urge Gwawil to do this, and as soon as he gets his feet in the bag, you pull the bag up over him, pull it shut, tip it upside down, and you'll have him. And then he'll be at your mercy. About this time in the feast now taking place, Gwawil is starting to get restless, and he wants an answer from Pwyll. And Pwyll says, you shall have as much of your request as is in my power. So he's learning to be a little bit more cagey. And Rhiannon tells the story, this feast is already promised, you'll have to come back in a year. So everybody leaves for home. And in a year later, the wedding feast comes, and it happens just as Rhiannon said it would. Pwyll comes in disguised as a beggar, and starts filling up the bag, and the tables are emptying, and Gwawil asks, is this ever going to be done? And pretty soon it's just as he says. He puts his feet in the bag, Pwyll pulls it up over, pulls it shut, ties a knot in it, and he blows his horn and throws off the beggar's clothes, and his men come, and each one that comes, they play badger in a bag. And each one, as they come in the hall, they either kick the bag or they give it a good whomp with their staff. And he's crying out, and he fears for his life, and he eventually begs for mercy, and he says, I'm going to die if this continues. So Pwyll asks the advice of Rhiannon, and Rhiannon says, make a deal with him. Tell him that he must give gifts to all the suppliants and all the minstrels in the name of Pwyll, and that he must renounce any claim that he has, and he must seek no revenge. So Pwyll thinks that's reasonable, and he relays that to Gwawil, and Gwawil says, okay, and he gets freed, and he and his men depart, and the wedding feast goes on as expected, and then they celebrate the nuptial night, and the wedding feast continues the next day, and there doesn't even say how many days it goes on, until finally Pwyll rises and says, I would really like to take, he says to Heviad, he says, I would like to take my bride and go back to Dyfed. And Heviad says, that's great. And Pwyll gives gifts to everyone and goes back to Dyfed. This is a rather long story, but interesting all the way through. And he goes back to Dyfed, and he rules there, and everything goes well. But after 3 years, there is no heir. And the people are getting restless, and they request a new queen, which is their right to do, and they start putting it to him. And Pwyll requests 1 more year. And in that year, a child is delivered. There's always some question about who the father is, and in some cases, even who the mother is. But at any rate, they have a beautiful child. And one night, shortly after the birth, Rhiannon goes to bed, and she leaves 6 women to take care of the child. But before midnight, each of them falls asleep, and when they wake up right before dawn, the baby is gone. And this is a capital crime. And they don't want to die, so they conspire, and one of them says, there's a deer hound that just had pups. Let's kill the pups and rub the blood on Rhiannon and throw some of the bones in front of her and say that Rhiannon killed her own child. And they agree to that, and they hold court, and the people are angry, and they ask Pwyll to put her away and take a new queen. He says, I can't do that because she's already born an heir, but she can be punished. And so all the elders and the wise men get together, and they settle on a punishment that for 7 years she must sit by the mounting block outside of the court at Arbeth, and whoever comes up that she doesn't know, she has to tell her story. She has to tell the whole story, and then when they get off their horses to go to the court, she has to carry them on her back to the court. And that's her thing. So she starts her sentence. She's not happy about it, but she starts her sentence. Meanwhile, in another province called Went is Qued, there is a man named Tiernan. And Tiernan has a problem. He has this world-class, beautiful mare, an absolutely beautiful horse. And every year, on May Eve, before the 1st of May, we're going to talk a lot about that the next time we meet, not tonight. On May Eve, this horse delivers a foal, but when Tiernan gets there the next morning, the colt is always gone. And so this year he says, I'm not going to be anybody's fool anymore. What I'm going to do is I'm going to find out what's going on. So he fully arms himself and he goes to the stable. This is the last page of story. We don't even know that yet. In fact, that actually never is known. But at any rate, he's in the stable, and around midnight, the mare drops a foal. And he marvels at it because it's beautiful, and instead of being wiggly-legged the way a young colt often is, this one is strong and sturdy. And he's examining it, and as he's examining it, he hears a loud roar-like sound, and this claw reaches in the window and grabs the mane. And he's, I'm not going to lose another one, so he pulls his sword, and with one stroke, he lops the claw off, and outside there's a tremendous scream and a crash. So Tiernan runs outside to see what it is, but it's so dark he can't see anything. So he's going to follow the sound through the night when he remembers he left the stable door open. And so he goes back to the stable to close the door, and right there at the door is this lovely golden-haired babe. And it's wrapped in swaddling clothes, and it's inside a silk mantle. So he picks up the babe, and he takes it to his wife, and they conclude from this fancy mantle, probably embroidered or brocaded or something like that, that this must be some kind of noble child. And they love the child immediately, and they call it Weary Golden Hair. And they dedicate, since they're both born at the same moment, they dedicate the colt and the child to each other. they find that the child is a prodigy. The child grows super fast, and it's really strong, and it's very beautiful and intelligent. So that by age 2, it looks like it's a 6-year-old kid already. And the thing of it is, when they look at it, they see the face of Pwyll. It looks identically like Pwyll. And they said, this has got to be Pwyll's child. And so they, much as they love the child, they decide they have to return it. And so what they do is they take the child and they go to Arbeth. And when they get at the mounting block, Rhiannon starts telling her story. And she tells the whole story to them. And when she's finished, she says to each of them, hop on my back and I'm going to carry you into court. And each of them refuses and walks in on their own. They're well known because they themselves are noble people. And they arrive in the court just when there is a feast. And they're greeted warmly. And Tiernan is given the seat right between the king and the queen. And during the feast, he tells the story. And they bring in the boy, and everybody agrees that the boy is Pwyll's child, and everybody acclaims him as the rightful heir, and the king and queen recognize him as the rightful heir. And Tiernan and his wife both sacrifice their right to the kid, and they're given all kinds of gifts. And they're asked what they named him. And they say, oh, that's a lovely name, but we're going to give him a different name. And they call him Pryderi. And Pryderi means something like relief of anxiety. And that's the name that he carries through life. After they receive all their rewards and feast for a few days, they go back home. And Pryderi grows up to be a very strong and handsome young man with all of the confidence of his father. He eventually marries a young woman named Kigva, and together they rule David. That's the story. Now for 18 hours of discussion. It's a lovely story. You can see why this is real mythology. It's not just a story, but there are all kinds of things in there. The theme that we're working on for this series of talks is one of the things that plays through all of the 4 Mabinogi. And that is the relationship between the inner and the outer worlds. Obviously, what happens is there is wife swapping going on back and forth between the inner worlds, and some of this happens in the outer world, and some of it happens in the inner worlds, and that's going to be what we're talking about probably for the rest of the semester. It's usually not something exotic that starts us to inquire and to turn inward and start us down a spiritual path. It's not, what separates us from the rest of the world and turns us all into weirdos is something that happens every day, engages us in a way that we've never thought about it before. Whether it's Newton's having an apple drop on his head, or somebody like Kepler noticing that the relationship of the orbit of Saturn and Jupiter is the same as the relationship between 2 circles that inscribe and superscribe an equilateral triangle. It's something all at once starts us down this path, and we're hooked. In the case of Pwyll, what starts him down the path is a stag. Stags are in all mythologies, at least any mythology I've ever read, even Chinese, probably not Hawaiian because they didn't have stags in Hawaii, but every mythology I've ever encountered, stags are very important animals. They have many, besides being themselves, they have many symbolic qualities. For a good part of history, stags were thought of as representing erotic fury. And the reason for that is the gallbladder in the stag. There is no gallbladder. The bile goes into the penis of the stag, and this is supposed to make him extremely horny and extremely furious. At the other end of the spectrum, aside from rut, the stag has been considered an emblem of elevation, of purity, and even of chastity. If a maiden was killed by a stag, she was considered no longer chaste, even though she was still a maiden. Even in Christian times, the stag was represented as the elevated, pure, chaste Christ sacrificed. Another living emblem of the stag is as a symbol of rejuvenation, because every year the stag throws off one set of antlers and takes on a new set. And that is a rejuvenation. In fact, each year there are more points. In fact, a stag wasn't considered a stag unless it had 12 points in its rack, which meant it had to be at least 7 years old. They counted that carefully, that 7 years old is when it gets up to 12 points. As Koepsel is pursuing this stag with his hounds, he hears other hounds approaching him. Something like the Doppler effect, that the more you go towards something, the louder it comes and the more it seems to be approaching you. Now that's a clear indication of somebody who's entering into the inner worlds. There's an old superstition that says that your dreams are always the opposite of reality. That what happens in your dreams, the opposite is going to happen in life. That's a generalization, and like most generalizations of that type, it's generally erroneous. But there is one truth in it. And that is, everything in the spiritual worlds works from the general to the particular rather than the particular to the general. When a person for the first time enters into the inner worlds, the perspective is reversed. One notices the consequences before the causes. We've talked about that before when we talked about Titanic time, when we talked about the fact that Merlin lived backwards. He started out old, and he got younger as time went on. So there is, in this change of perspective, a reversal, so that everything seems the opposite of the way we thought it was. This is especially true in the desire world. It's especially true in the desire world when a person is not aware of their own desires. The perfect case is a paranoid attack. Violent paranoia. What always happens is the paranoid who actually precipitates the attack believes that other people are attacking him, and not realizing that his hatred toward others is being seen as others hating him. It's different when you don't have a body. That's the meaning. It seems to almost be just the opposite. If you don't have a body, then things are falling away. Things are unfolding. we have the myth of Tantalus. Tantalus is in water up to his neck, and all its fruit is hanging over his head, and every time he reaches for it, it pulls away. That's the what would you say, the purgatory of a person who is greedy for food, desiring something that pulls away. In the desire world, desire has a function. And the relationship of a desire toward an object is motive. It is a motive force to get us to reach out for something. The physical is not so surprising. The physical attainment of the desire is not so surprising. But what is surprising is that the hounds of hell get to the stag, the object of attention, before his hounds do. This is another fact, that a desire is in, I don't know how to say it, in the inner world, a desire is often fulfilled before the physical desire. I can remember one time back in 1963, I hung out with a satyromaniac. And in this summer of 1963, it was his quest and goal to copulate with a different woman every day. And it was a phenomenon to watch. He was handsome and he was intelligent. And it was almost like watching an animal that had, saliva dripping from its fangs or something. But the funny thing of it was, sometimes even before he met the woman, he knew the desire was already satisfied. And even before he bedded her, he knew the desire was already satisfied. This is emblematic of the fact, like in the rising of Lazarus. Christ says, I'm just praying for these people around here so they don't think that I'm doing this. I'm praying because I know that you know what my prayers are and they're already answered before I even ask. And it's like saying that by the time something gets to the physical level, that it is a physical desire, it's already been satisfied in the inner world. And so this is why the hounds of hell actually get there before his hounds do. Now this is something that can be used, and not merely for the satisfaction of personal desires. It's something that can be used for motivation or desire in any way for anything positive. The Bible tells you very clearly, pray believing, and your prayers will be answered. When you get that sense, it isn't just a blind believing, it is a knowing, because when you pray with all of your feeling. And when you know in your feeling that there's no way that you're... But they were fun to do. Boy, were they fun. It's like they're almost like I was just fascinated, entranced or something like that. Everything just came clear. In the book by Herman Melville, Moby Dick, there's a very beautiful description. I'm sorry I didn't bring it in. But in that, there is a description of the two aspects of white. One being a symbol of purity and cleanliness, and another being a representation of evil. Ancients feared white animals more than they feared black animals. And a white animal was very often the emblem of death. This goes right down to the fact that there is something deathly about white animals. They can't camouflage themselves, for one, but they're white because of the fact that the light ether can't work its way through to bring the pigmentation into the hair. And if the light ether is ineffective, there's something about it that the driving of the energy in the body, because the light ether is also responsible for driving the blood, this represented the ancient people that this etheric anemia represented something deathly, something that didn't have the right stuff to it to bring itself out, to express itself. And I think that's what's represented why the hounds of hell are white rather than colored. When the incident happens with the stag, Will still acts like a person of this realm, an earthly human. He uses the desire for the stag to take the stag to himself. The spiritual man would live more by honor and the higher values, but Will tries to draw to himself, and he thinks he can get away with something because there's nobody there to see what he's doing. So what this is the state of humanity. Because we're blind, we think everyone else is blind. Because we're selfish, we feel that justifies our actions. And we're materialistic. The material object, attainment of that, is all that counts. That's the only end that is there. He hasn't bargained for the fact that somebody might have a vision beyond his own material vision. So, because of really carrying through and carrying his desires right unto death, he's brought into contact with the inner world, the world of fairy, the realm of the dead, the realm of causes rather than consequences. It's almost a moralistic story in that it shows a relationship between death and desire. If you desire something, even the most lofty thing, and do whatever you can to get it, it draws you right to the doors of death. Now Aaron, coming from the other side and being a god, is masterful in the way that he handles Will. First he refuses to greet him, knowing this has to hollow out somebody with that much pride. Then he tells him, you've dishonored yourself, and you're unworthy of attention. And breaks him down even further. He doesn't attack, he doesn't accuse, and he only speaks when he's been addressed first or when he's been questioned. Sort of the way things are with the spiritual world. They sleep until you stir them up. You stir up the inner world, then they respond. From the viewpoint of the desire world, Aaron represents the objectification of desire itself, the way desire functions. The purpose of desire is motivation. A motivation that brings us out of us. If we were only, we could be like a tree and just sit there. But the fact that we have desire brings us to become outward and to care something for something. Even if it's something as simple as being led on by a stag, or being led on by Aaron to say, I want this. Desire incites action. And as soon as there is action, there is consequence. So it is action that starts the cause and consequence into motion. That puts it into being. If nothing is done, there is no consequence. But action brings experience. When a desire has been fulfilled, everything goes back to something like a homeostasis. Everything is quiescent. Everything is in a state of balance again. And it's something like a sleeping lion with its belly full. It's, again, a kind of a death. Desire always leads to death, but it's a desire that is not a death that is not barren, and it's not a fruitless death. It's sort of like it's a death that's laden with experience or with soul material. If we live as Quill lives, full tilt, giving it everything we've got, death isn't a bad thing. It's not a fearsome thing at all. Even if we've dishonored ourselves, we've lived it fully. Whether he knows it or not, Quill does a very remarkable thing when he has been cut to the essential quick of his being, to his inner nature, when he says, I have done wrong. If I have done wrong, how will I earn your friendship? Not how can I win your friendship, but how will I win your friendship? There's nothing in this, even when he's being apologetic, there's nothing negative about him. He has reached the stage of life that he's so proactive, he's so driven, that it isn't a matter of can I do this, but how will I do this? He knows very clearly that he's going to have to do it. And I think this is necessary. If we want to enter, as soon as we self-consciously enter the spiritual world, we're proclaiming Godhood. And if we are proclaiming Godhood, we have to ourselves be active or proactive or giving creative beings, because that's what God is. And so we have to be thoroughly positive and not doubtful, not weak or sickly or anything like that. In all of this, whether we look to Buddha, or if we look to Socrates, or if we look to Jesus, or if we look to Don Juan Matos, there is a general agreement. Death is our friend. Death is the proving of everything else. It's sort of like the satisfaction of the ultimate desire to live. And if we pass through death, then we have a really positive, full life. It's really our friend. It's always, and maybe over our shoulder all the time, and there may be something of us that we dread it. We only have that dread to the degree that we are dark, or that we're questioning or negative or weak or something like that. The other part of the remarkable statement by Quill, if I have done wrong, how will I earn your friendship, is the friendship itself. It's altruism. It's the beginning of a positive life of desire. This is a very different Quill than earlier. First he wants something for himself. Now he wants to be a friend. Altruism, the emotion of altruism, is found in the higher part of the desire world. All of the higher regions of the desire world are positive. They are all desires to give, not to take, desires to give. And this is what indicates that we are becoming gods. when we don't do away with desire, because that's not our end, because desire is given to us as a motivator. But instead of becoming repulsive takers, that we want everything for ourselves and growl over it like a dog over its bowl, and that repulses everything around us, we become attractive givers. When we become godlike, so that every opportunity we see as an opportunity to give, that is when we are ready to begin entering the spiritual worlds. When we enter the inner worlds, we're not entering them as an amusement park. They're not there for our entertainment. We can enjoy them just as we enjoy this world. This is a very beautiful world to enjoy, especially in a few weeks when spring comes out full blast. It's going to be super beautiful to enjoy. Neither are the inner spiritual worlds to be looked at as a treasure for our enrichment. We'll certainly be enriched by entering into them. The spiritual worlds are sufficient unto themselves. They have their own ends, they have their own purposes, and the more we can attune ourselves to the purposes that are behind the causes rather than the consequences, the sooner we are to be in touch with the higher purposes that are behind things. We no longer live our little life, but we live a bigger, a grander life, something to a much higher purpose. So immediately, he's given a task. Aron says, in effect, I have a problem. Take care of it for me. And death being ruled by Scorpio, and Scorpio having that ironic flavor, this whole thing is tremendously ironic. Here is the Prince of Death asking Quill to eliminate his enemy, Hofkin. Irony. It's terribly irony. But wherever you find something, it's like in a dream, where something seems incongruous, that's where a very important meaning is. And in this case, it is in the irony. Again, in the universal sense, if everything stayed in a homeostasis permanently, nothing would be accomplished. There'd be no growth. There'd be no death, because life and death would be all one. There'd be no difference between even the spiritual and material, between inner and outer. There'd be nothing new. Nothing and everything would be one. It would be homostatic. Homeostatic, I guess, the proper pronunciation. Tim is. He would gently tell me after class. I like being corrected, but I love it when it's done with delicacy and with taste. Even the Supreme Being needs new life, needs growth, needs novelty. And this means action and change. If action and change are so important for us, and we're mere privates or corporals in the service, why shouldn't it be important to the Supreme Being? When there is action and change, there is differentiation. Creation and experimentation require differentiation. Now, creation and differentiation on the level of the Supreme Being might be very different than they are for us. But on every level, differentiation and creation are necessary. That's again, whether it is a horizontal differentiation or whether it's a vertical. It has to be done. Probably both. And the consequence of differentiation is always specialization to some degree. Certainly in the spiritual worlds, the specialization isn't as great as here. Red can't do the same things that green does. And a god can't do the same thing that a stone can. But all are completely necessary to the whole. Just that there's a greater degree of specialization and differentiation. So it really shouldn't surprise us in this irony that there are things that a mere human being can do that a god can't do. The question is, what are the things that we can do that the gods can't? And that's where we have to find the answer or the meaning of what we can offer or what we can bring into the land of fairy, into the inner worlds, what we can really do. We know we can kill, and we seem to excel at that. It seems to me that the answer to that question, what are those things that we can do that the gods can't, has to do with our cosmographical location. Because we're all like quill. We're focused in the outer, in the dense material world, and we think we can get away with things unseen. Aron is focused in the inner worlds, and being a god, he's a creator. He's not a creature, or he's not a becoming creator as we are, but he's a creator. So the question is a little clearer. It's more a question of what is there in our existence, in the outer, dense material world, that we have that is lacking or different from what the gods have in the inner worlds. What is our specialty? What is our gift that we can give to the gods that they can't get for themselves? Clearly, you think it's like, what kind of a gift do I give to my father who's 91 years old? Some people don't even give green bananas to somebody who's 91 years old. You think, what can I give to the gods? Well, the material world, or the mineral world, is said to be ruled by Saturn. And that is because of its hard, definite, opaque nature. And because of its great limitation. Its limitation in perspective, where we can only see something one view at a time. This world is discrete. It's exclusive. No two objects can hold the same space at the same time. In the inner worlds, that's no trouble. It's a world of singular objects. We see one at a time, from one view at a time. Like Saturn, singularity. There is so much singularity in this world that it represents the end of the line. You can't go any further, as far as we can see anyway, into limitation, into simplification. Sort of like that great statement, what part of no don't you understand? You can't go any further into separation or individuation. You can't go any further with singularity. It's so outward that there is no inward. That's very different than the realm of the gods. The only way we can see the inside of things is by killing the whole, breaking it apart, and looking at the insides as though they were outsides. Our whole consciousness is deathly. It's analytical. It's so outward and so obvious that it is simplistic to the point that it's illusionary. So, coming to our waking consciousness, where we're in control of everything we do, everything we know, we have come to a consciousness that is analytical, discrete, objective, despite the subjectivity of our perception. We know specifics. We know particulars. The inner worlds, the world of fairy, the realm of Anwen, is different. If we do see the inner worlds the same way we see this world, it's a sign that we're seeing them wrong. It's a sign that in our insecurity and in our materialistic assumption, we're superimposing materialistic vision onto something that is very different. Because the things in the spiritual world are very fluent. As soon as we start turning inward and we have any success at all, it becomes a nightmare because they're so fluent. They're so interpenetrating and they're so multifarious. It's almost hard to keep your consciousness with it. It changes so quickly, and one thing flows into another that they have an objectivity, and that kind of consciousness is a long, long time in coming. We can't even put it into our words, because our words are all of the outer world. We'd like to say it's this and that. We're very ostensive. We can't do that. The inner worlds are so inward that when we perceive something with inward perception, even the object of our inward perception is seen within ourselves, so that it and ourselves inwardly change at the same time. But that's a taboo subject, because that brings us back to the Suringama Sutra again, and we can't bring that up again. So there is something very different between our consciousness and the denizens of the inner world. As much as the kingdom of the inner world, the fairyland, is magical, nobody there has the brain-mind consciousness, the singularity, and the object orientation that we have. They have the same principle of singularity manifest in a different way as an inner unity, but not in that discrete sense that we have it. So it is that discrete, objective consciousness that calls a shovel, that discrete consciousness of single objects, particulars and specifics, that is our gift. That is why the stroke that does in Havgen is a single stroke. It's a clear, undeniable singularity. One of the qualities of Saturn is faithfulness. Two kinds of faithfulness. One is that if we put a rock down, it'll stay in that place. Or a mechanical device will act mechanically. Or if we perceive something in the material world and we produce it, we can reproduce it faithfully. Faithful to the reality of it. Eventually, our consciousness inwardly becomes faithful to our duty, and that ultimately it will require one replication of an experience to learn a lesson. Saturn doesn't like to do things over again and again. Until then, we have to learn our lessons over again and again. And instead of having faithfulness, we have insecurity. We have to hit Havgen again and again and again, and the reason it revives is because we don't have that security. We don't have that faithfulness. When Pwyll agrees, Arwan sets down the conditions, and the conditions are a bond of friendship. No matter what, we have to focus ourselves in the inner worlds with a bond of loving consciousness to hold ourselves to anything. If we are not friends with any object of our attention, we are immediately lost in the material world. They exchange their persons and lives. And that's the really important thing if we get nothing else all semester. When we enter the inner worlds, it's a whole different ball game. What works here won't work there, and what works there won't work here. We have to take on a different life. We have to take on a different consciousness, or we'll never get it. We can meditate on a truth that may be the truth that could save ourselves and a whole kingdom, but if we don't think differently than we think here, it won't get us anywhere. Part of the conditions are nights with the most beautiful woman that he will have ever seen. This is both an object of desire, because even in the inner world you have to have some object of desire, and it's an ideal for the spirit. In order to raise yourself in the inner worlds from realm to realm, you have to have an ideal, and by fixing yourself on that ideal, much as Dante fixed his attention on the face of Beatrice every time he wanted to rise to another realm, we have to have something of that nature. And he was given a time frame, a pace, because the inner worlds, the spiritual worlds, are more of time than of space, more of spirit than of matter. And one must have a pace or the understanding of a cycle. Is to make progress. It's a year and a day. It's a whole cycle and then one baby step forward. When Pwyll asks Havgen, asks Aron where he's going to find Havgen, he's still thinking like the material world. He says, I want a map. I want to know where it is. He doesn't realize, or doesn't fully realize, that in the spiritual world, one directs one's attention to the object of love, and one is attracted to it, or it to oneself, or both. It's a homing kind of situation. He's also showing a material consciousness when he says, what's going to happen with my kingdom? He's showing at this point a little earthly insecurity. It isn't until we really let go of everything and until our duty or our service or what we are to do in the inner worlds is all important so that we can even get past the fear of death. Only when we get that far, that dedicated in our drive, can we make it across and actually go into the inner world. As is common to threshold myths, you're always given a mentor. In the case of Dante, he's given Virgil. Virgil takes him into the land of the dead. Or in some cases, it was Charon. Or in some cases, it was Persephone herself as an angel bearing the golden bough, the mistletoe that carried the initiate into the inner world. This is an archetypal story in that Pwyll gets Aron, the king of the dead himself. Now, this is the funny thing about stories. Children are more focused in the inner world than adults are. And it's always amazing how a child can hear a story again and again and again, and the child is never bored by that story. It isn't boring to us that things turn out exactly as Aaron says they're going to turn out. In this world, the outer world, form is the order of the day. The exactness and the specifics are the all-important thing. Form, if it's once been completed, if it's been totally experienced, it gets spent and it's unnecessary. And again, there's a homostasis there. It even seems boring to us. In the inner planes, the form is relatively insignificant. It is the life that is important. One can live the life of something again and again, and it never tires. In fact, it even becomes more lively. That's one of the problems with predictions on this plane. Somebody makes a prediction, and we're looking at the specifics. We're looking at, how terrible it's going to be when this takes place and that takes place, without seeing the specifics as something of merely a symptom of a cycle, of a greater life, of something that has more of a purpose. This is why every time there have been predictions, look at all of the predictions of the oracle at Delphi. They were all accurate, and they were all mistaken, because people looked at the form, and they didn't look at the life. They didn't look at the intention. We become concerned with the circumstances, and we lose the meaning. And then therefore we fear death, and we fear what's going to come down. In Onwin, one can know the events, and that's no distraction, because one knows that they're just marking posts along the way for living the life. Not too much longer. There's another 3 or 4 pages. It also applies to Quill. It's the life that he lives. It's exceedingly important that he remains chaste with his friend's wife out of a sense of friendship, even though he has not been asked to do so. This is someone that now has the inner sense of rightness. It's true that conservation and transformation of sexual energy as creative energy is mandatory to enter the inner worlds. You just can't spill it all over the place and hope to enter the inner worlds. It's also important that Quill doesn't indulge himself. He doesn't become morally and spiritually flaccid. He remains true to his ideal. But it is also true that in remaining dear or keeping dear his ideal to himself, he realizes he can't attain to it. Because the queen of the realm of death, one cannot think of uniting with an archetypal figure like that. And one still has to remember where one is at. When the battle's all over, it's important that the company of Hovgen surrenders and give their allegiance to the man in the form of Arwen. That in itself is important. There's no room for personality in the spiritual worlds. The more egoistic we are, the more separative we are. And when one is functioning from the inner side of things, one doesn't refer to oneself in a personal sense. That's why all the while he is over there, Pwyll is known as the man in the form of Arwen. He is not Pwyll, he is not Arwen, and he is the man in the form of that. It is sort of like an impersonal being. But it's important that that allegiance be sworn. And this is a really big concept. At least to me it's really big. And it's hard to get through our head. But it's something we have to go at again and again. But each of us in our lives lives the universe. Each of our lives is the life of the universe. Not just a microcosm or a miniature. It is that too. Not just an analogy, not just a copy, but a version of the whole universe itself. God's view is the central and directive. It's the omnipotent version of the cosmos, the only one that is totally objective. But each of us, in the extent of spirit, is co-equal. And it's a law of service that because God gives us that objective, central, creative view, that of each of us, as we come into our own, we reproduce, from our point of view, the same entire universe. Because we're expelling the gods out of us to the extent of the universe that were built into us in the first place. So each of us creates the entire universe. And as we surrender that, the objective universe becomes the richer for it. Because God shared the original with us, it is returned in multitude. This is the way the spiritual worlds are. Something can be reproduced inside of itself many times over, and it is still the same thing, but it's much more of itself. I don't know how to say it. But as each of us comes into our own, we are the universe. And when we surrender that, because the men of Havgien are in us, just like Aron is in us, and Pwyll is in us, and the Queen of... they're all parts of us, just like all parts of a dream are parts of us. The surrender of what has been gained by the war of one blow, the surrender of that to the king of the realm of the dead is not living in a subjective little world of our own, but it is a greater world wherein everything exists, and it becomes a reality when we surrender it, when we give it over to the macrocosm. So again, we see that there is a symbiosis between Pwyll and Arwen, which is like our symbiosis in a microcosm with God in the macrocosm. Now, another point that's interesting, I'm sorry, but I just went wild with all of this, and I had all sorts of things came clear to me, or things that I knew before. At first it seems unbelievable that the king of the world of the dead would not know what was going on between Pwyll and his wife. He doesn't find out till later. The first thought, and it is a true thought, is that Arwen was under a code of honor to not snoop or not interfere, just as Pwyll was not to indulge. It is true with seers, I assume it's true for God, that one is honor-bound not to use seership personally. Rudolf Steiner disclosed investigating something else, he disclosed a death plot on his own life, and he did nothing. That the death plot almost came to pass, and then somebody, by some kind of mistake or something like that, intervened, and he wasn't killed. It's exactly as it was said of Christ on the cross. He would not save himself. It's the only way you can live altruistic life. So that's true. But there's more to it than that. And it seems to have to do with what academic philosophers call a priori versus a posteriori thought. That is, knowledge before and after the fact. It seems reasonable that Aaron could have known what was transpiring as it was transpiring, and he could have even found or have presented to him a viable reason to do so. But he didn't. He could have known it as it transpired or after it transpired. He didn't bother to. But he couldn't have known it a priori. He couldn't have known it beforehand. You see, even though he knows the whole storyline, and he can predict to Poel what's going to happen, he didn't know everything that went on. That is, the future is not all written out. The script, the form, the formula is written out, but the future itself is not. What we are in is for real. We're not walking through something that is staged. We are becoming creators. And when we create, we don't know what the creation is going to be. Or it wouldn't be a creation. We're trying to do something completely new. We may know the pattern. We may have a dream. We may have a sense of what we would like it to be, but it never comes out as we expect it. And that's not because of our unclear conception or because of a lack of skill. Those things enter in. It's because of the novelty of creation. Even if we look at life as an experiment, we may have a hypothetical idea of how things are. But we really don't know until we experience it completely. It's the most infamous of all things to do a dry lab experiment, to fake results. There's no learning in fake results. A maiden or a virgin self-conscious entrance into the spiritual worlds, an initiation into becoming godhood, is a creative act. It is a crucial time. It's an instant of great moment, and it is unknown. When a spiritual teacher puts us through a trial, we usually don't even know that we're being tried. We don't even know that we're really close to being a candidate. But it goes the other way also. The teacher does not know the outcome. If it is a real trial, a trial of our willingness to give ourselves, to live a creative life, the outcome is unknown. Poel, as all heroes represent the initiate, is very confident. And in his confidence, that is what that positivity that brings him to that kind of trial. But it isn't necessarily an indicator of the outcome of the trial. So it's not surprising then that there is this unknown, and that this unknown would surround the creativity, the creative force itself. On the other hand, when Quill returns to his earthly kingdom, he also checks it out to see that it's been taken care of. And that's equally important. This world and our work here is an end in itself. Not the only end, but an end. Just because Quill can now enter Onwin and trade back and forth with Aron doesn't mean that he has spent the material world. He still has responsibilities here, and it's important that he checks that those responsibilities are taken care of. Because for a long time yet to come, our greater responsibility, the gift that we have to give, our singularity,